My name is Simon Harden. I'm going to be chairing this session, and I'm chairing it on behalf of the Teaching Statistics section of the Royal Statistical Society. This talk is one of a series, and they're talks which are based around published papers on teaching statistics. Very briefly, that's our next seminar in the series on the 11th of January. The title is there. It's Hilary Watt from Imperial, and I think she'll be covering issues such as interpretation of p-values and confidence intervals. If anyone else would like to volunteer to speak in this series, please get in touch with us. There's the chair of the section. The email address is on the screen there. It's Eleanor Jones, or just contact us via Twitter or via the RSS, where there's an email link. So just before we get going, just to say we are recording this session. So if you do end up speaking, just be aware that that's the case. In terms of questions, if you think of questions while Rachel is talking, by all means post them to the chat. I will keep an eye on that, and then when we get to the end, I'll try and sort of bring out any questions that have come up, possibly call on you to speak. Otherwise, just point Rachel at them directly. Otherwise, just hold on to your questions until the end, and then we can have a discussion at the end of Rachel's talk. So we are delighted today to have Professor Rachel Hilliam from the Open University, as well as working there. She is also a vice president, that's right, of the Royal Statistical Society. She's the vice president for professional affairs and chairs the professional affairs committee there. She's also on the committee of the Teaching Statistics section of the Royal Statistical Society. So I think that's enough from me, and over to you, Rachel.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that, Chris. Vice, I'll take that one down there. So I'll just share my screen now. She says with complete confidence that that's going to work. Right, okay, so you should all be able to see that, and the only person that I can now see is Simon, so that's lovely, in the left-hand corner. So as he said, he'll keep an eye on the chat down there and feed anything through. So thank you very much to Eleanor and all of the statistics teaching section for inviting me to give that. As Simon says, this is part of a series of talks that are based on papers that have been written. So this particular paper was one that I submitted with a group of colleagues last year to teaching mathematics and its applications. So there's kind of more details in that paper than what I'm going to talk about here. So feel free to contact me if this sparks sort of interest and ideas afterwards, and I can send further details through to you. Okay, so as Simon says, I am at the Open University. I've been there for kind of, 11 or so years now, apart from brief spells out in other places. I've been working in the area of student support more broadly for quite a long time in various roles that I've held at the Open University. So I've kind of thought about some of these issues that I'm going to be discussing for quite a long time from various viewpoints, really. I think one of the things that actually sparked off me writing this paper was during the pandemic, we spent an awful lot of time, I think, as a community, thinking about how to move our teaching online. And some of the issues that sparked off, one of the things that I was involved with was the teaching and learning mathematics online, along with Kevin Houston and Michael Grove, in terms of putting that together. And I think one of the great things about Talmo is that we really came together as a community and really shared ideas around how we could move our teaching online, and also how we could try and engage our students within the constraints of what we were working within. So it felt like a really supportive time where we all came together. We shared lots of ideas around this. What I felt was lacking in lots of those sessions was whilst there was an awful lot there about what we did in our individual modules to support students, there was not quite as much in terms of how we might support students who were now in a remote kind of world, both in that qualification world and also more broadly in terms of what their kind of student life cycle looked like from beginning to end. And I began to think about, was this because it's sort of, as we all learnt, it's very difficult in terms of engaging students when they're not physically face to face with us. So we have to think of creative ways of being able to engage students and build that into our modules. And therefore, is that something that we just didn't really think about because of the pressures of what we needed to do? Or is it the case that actually we spend less time thinking about that anyway? We all invest quite a lot of time into how to teach our modules and how to engage students in our modules, but do we really spend an awful lot of time thinking about not just how our modules fit into the overall curriculum, but how we can support students within that maths and statistics community more broadly between modules and across, as I say, from both, you know, the first contact with the university to them leaving at the end of that. And I think potentially we maybe don't think about that as much as we should possibly do. I think that's true both at the Open University and also different institutions that I've worked at in my career as well with that. So what I wanted to share was some framework that I've used for a number of years now to try and make sure we've got engagement with different stakeholders in this, and also how we've tried to embed that within the Open University within a particular structure, and the evaluation that we've done on that during the last couple of years or so, to share some lessons that I've learned from that and some of the areas where I think we've actually had impact and some of the areas where I think we've got work to do. And hopefully this can spark a sort of wider discussion in our community about thinking about that sort of wider support that we might want to give our students. So in order for you to understand the context, I'm going to give you a little bit of, not very much, but a little bit of background of what it's like to really study with the Open University and some of the challenges that we have there. I'm going to take you through the framework that I have been working with, take you through how we've embedded that within our systems, and then take you through the evaluation at the end of that. And hopefully then we'll have some time that we can discuss some of these issues, and I'd be interested to hear your feelings about all of this as well. Okay, so for those of you that aren't aware, the Open University is big. Yes, it's distance learning, but it caters for an awful lot of students down there. So anything that we do, we have to do at scale and make sure it's very difficult to have cottage industries working when you've got the number of students that we have in there. So things do need to be sort of systematically embedded in some sort of way. So to give you an idea, there are around about, it varies, but there's somewhere between 16 and 18,000 students studying maths and statistic modules at any one time. So that's in any year down there. We have potentially a far greater proportion of students with some sort of declared disability. So whenever we are thinking about engagement, we also need to keep an eye on those particular groups of students and how we're supporting those. We also have groups of students that are have particular circumstances, so not just people that are careers, heavy caring responsibilities and so on, but we also have groups of students that are prisoners, living in secure environments down there, as well as people like British forces overseas. So whenever we're thinking about ways of engaging these students, we need to think about those special category of students that may not be able to sort of engage in the same way as the vast majority of our other students. And I think potentially you can think about your own groups of students in a similar sort of way. You will have particular groups of students there, be they commuter students or whatever, that you may need to do something slightly different for in order for them to be able to have the same engagement as the bulk of the rest of your students down there. Okay, so this is kind of what it's like to be an OU student. And this is the sort of thing that during the pandemic, many of us now within the maths and stats community have become kind of quite used to doing in that sort of flipped online world down there. So our students generally sign up for one or more than one module. These modules last for 9 months. Typically they start in September and end round about when their exams happen in May, June time. All of our websites are embedded in Moodle down there, so the same as your own VLE learning environment, so you get different ones down there. What we do is we have a very structured week by week calendar that these students go through, so they should know what they are supposed to be studying at every single week. So a bit like all of us try to do when we moved our teaching online, there are multiple places that they have opportunities for engagement. So it's not just a case of them going away and reading this material. So we have interactive quizzes that are splattered all the way through these modules. They have kind of graded feedback in them that points them, you know, if they've got questions wrong, points them to particular areas of the module, then helps them in terms of answering the question if they get it wrong again, and so on. They also have little tiny videos in there. We could tend to call those screencasts. They last for, you know, somewhere between about 5 and 10 minutes. These are ones that take them through a particular bit of the module that might need explaining in a slightly different way down there. Again, they all have transcripts with them as well for students that might have visual impairments and so on. And we also have a whole range of little computer apps, again, that help them with particular concepts. So there's plenty of bits within each module to try and make sure those students are engaged with their learning in whatever way that happens to be. In terms of their more formal sort of interaction and engagement with each other and with members of staff down there, one of the luxuries that we have at the Open University is that for every single module, we have a whole army of tutors. I'll also end up calling those associate lecturers and ALs as we go through this talk. I know I will, so forgive me if I drop into that sort of speak down there. So each module, as I say, has this whole army of tutors that works on it, and each tutor is assigned a small group of 20 students to look after. So you can think about this in the same way you might think about example classes and things down there. Each of those tutors are responsible for doing what I'm going to call correspondence tuition for those 20 students. So each of those modules has continuous assessment that happens in there. The tutors mark that continuous assessment, but they don't just mark it, they use that as an opportunity for moving the students' learning on. So it's very much not marking, it very much is about giving feedback and very tailored feedback to that student down there as well. They also give tutorials. These tend to, in the main, be online tutorials. Most of them are recorded, not all of them are recorded. Because we've been doing this for a long time at the OU, again, we've got various mechanisms of making sure that students are engaged during those online tutorials as well. So again, the types of things that we all talked about during the last couple of years in terms of making sure you've got engagements in those synchronous settings. They are also the first port of call for any sort of academic support. But it's really is academic support to do with that particular module down there. So problems that the students might be having, difficulties in terms of understanding and so on. It's the tutor that they'll go to first of all for that type of thing. So you can think about the tutor in the whole way that we think about support as being a combination of the people that might do your example classes for you, plus, to a certain extent, some of that personal tutor that you might think about in your face-to-face setting as well. However, what the ALs can't do, the tutors can't do, is because they are only employed for that one module, they don't necessarily have knowledge about the entire curriculum that these students are studying. So they aren't the place that the students can go and say, okay, I've just done this year one module. I'm thinking about these modules at year two. Can we have a discussion about what might be sensible module choices to take? They don't necessarily have that knowledge. So that knowledge needs to be embedded somewhere else. And that's the sort of bit that I really want to talk about in a moment. Just to wrap up sort of engagement within the module, each of those modules has got lots of different types of forums on there, online forums. Because these modules are large, so that one that I've just shown you, which was a level 1 module, there are about 1,000 students that take in every cohort that take that particular module. So the student forums are potentially slightly more lively maybe than some of the ones where you may run online forums, just because we've got a larger body of students in there. They do get peer support. We work quite hard to try and make sure that, well, some modules do it better than others, that they try and support each other, as well as the tutors and also the people that look after those modules, people like myself that are in charge of actually running those modules, all contribute to those forums as well. Okay, so this is kind of fine. So for 9 months of the year, these students happily have various ways to engage with other students, with their tutor, to a certain extent with people like me down there, and they feel part of this particular community, which is this module community. What they don't necessarily have is then any bridge between modules, any way to talk about, to talk to students that might be on a different module, any type of, inter-module support that might go on down there. So it's that sort of thing that I want to talk about as well. Before I do that, partly because this is going to come into some of what I talk about later in terms of evaluation with this, there is another side of the whole support area for our students and for students across the whole of mathematical sciences in higher education as well, where we think of that pastoral support and who actually are the people that provide that pastoral support down there. So just like in your universities, you've got various units doing this. The same is true at the OU as well. As I've said, we work at scale with this, so this becomes slightly more problematic because our students are also all online. Most of this is done through what you might think of as call centres. They're not call centres, but you can think about them in that sort of way. We've changed over the years the way that this support actually happens multiple times down there. The latest iteration of this was from about 2017. So what we have now, we have something that are called Student Recruitment and Support Centres, so shortened to SRSC up there. Basically, we are divided into 4 faculties. Maths and statistics fits into the faculty of STEM, and we have a student recruitment and support centre that's linked into that faculty. The left-hand side of that graph takes you down to people that are a subgroup of that student recruitment and support centre. These are the people that basically are what are known as SRF, so they're student recruitment fees. So they are the people that sign the students up to the modules. So as a student, their first port of contact with the university in terms of wanting to sign up for a qualification, the fees involved in that, things like student loans and so on, they are directed into this FRSC. There's a whole body of people that work in there. So their remit is to really give students information. So anything that the conversations that they have with students is information that those staff can glean from the multitude of different websites that we have across the Open University. So that is the sort of triaging point. But any conversations that are slightly more tricky, so for instance, students that are part way through their study that are now looking to look at what modules it might be good to study next, maybe linked into what careers they're doing and so on, they get triaged into the right-hand side of this, which is our student support team. And the student support team works at a school level. So now we've got a student support team that's linked into maths and statistics rather than having this overall link into the faculty down there. So there are lots of people that work in that student support team. We've got senior advisors. They deal with slightly more complex queries than just the people giving information. So they're also giving advice out there. So they're helping students really explore their circumstances, their career goals and so on, and what sort of modules it might be useful for them to do next. So they're very much giving advice, those people. The very right-hand side of this are the educational advisors who deal with very complex queries. So mainly the people where something has gone terribly wrong in their life, needing to look at maybe taking time out of study, what that means in terms of their emotional support that they might need. So they're very much people that are giving guidance down there. So the people that are exploring both personal and emotional circumstances that might sort of prevent study or needing to readjust study down there. So for anybody that might have worked across this gives you your what's called your information, advice and guidance sort of range of things that are offered. Now, the important point to note, and the reason why I'm banging on about this before we get into the nitty-gritty of this, is that none of those people actually have any sort of academic knowledge of maths and statistics. So whilst those people in our student support team are the people advising our students about what modules to study next, they don't have any knowledge of what it means. So if a student comes to them and says, oh, you know, I really dislike group theory, should I do this module there? They have no idea what group theory is. So back in 2014, where I was first involved with trying to make some sense out of all of this, I tried to set up very much a kind of partnership sort of working between these student support teams and the school. So we could really give them much better knowledge, things to hang on to, ways that they could contact academics and so on down there. So there was much more of a feeling of cohesion so that they could give much better advice to our students down there. In return, what we get as academics is these are the people that talk to huge numbers of our students on a day-to-day basis. So we get first-hand knowledge of where there might be trigger points in the module where things have gone wrong that maybe we're not picking up on. So this partnership working really does mean that if we have the right amount of respect for what each other's roles are, then actually the whole thing becomes much more profitable for all of us engaged in this. Okay, so that's kind of the setup, and they're the people that are involved in this. So, as I say, there's kind of two parts to this. So remember, those people have no knowledge of maths and statistics. So we need some way of being able to help those people access this knowledge. And we also need some way, ideally, of making it easier for the students to self-serve where this knowledge is as well. So they can actually start to make much more informed decisions about their study goals and what they need to do next. So as I say, I've been involved in trying to do some of this work for quite a long time. So at a university level, I was kind of involved with trying to map out what it looked like to be an OU student from beginning to end. And as part of doing some of that work, I came across this work by Michelle Morgan back in 2012, where she set out something called the Student Experience Practitioner Model. And what she talks about is these 6 different stages of being a student. So 6 different stages of study there, which takes students from their first contact with the university, what they might do in that pre-arrival stage, your sort of induction stage down there, so arrival and orientation, introduction to study. The reorientation and reinduction is either, moving on to your next module, moving from year 1 to year 2 and so on. And the next steps in terms of, does that mean further study at the end of that or some sort of career or whatever it happens to be? And what she is very keen on explaining is that when we think about these 6 stages of study, actually, there are 5 different areas that you might think students need information and advice and guidance for to be successful in each of those 6 stages of study. So she talks about at each of those stages really thinking about these 5 areas which revolve around the curriculum and the assessment, the pedagogy, because that might be very different in something like maths and stats to maybe music, let's say, the careers down there, because even right at the beginning of this journey, it could be that people need that kind of careers advice to know where their pathway is. Finance always comes to this at every single stage of study, especially if something goes wrong, and the types of different kind of wraparound support, be that mental health, be that academic support, whatever sort of support we're talking about in there as well. So this kind of resonated with me because I'd spent quite a long time trying to build up this partnership way of working, and what it helped with was being able to talk to different units in the university. If we had a framework and could talk to these different units about what is it that your unit brings to this part of the student journey, then it meant that we could all contribute in some sort of way to thinking what it really meant to be a maths and stats student, and what were the sort of wraparound things that these students needed for success at each part of that journey. Okay, so as I say, that's great, but because we work at scale, we can't necessarily do this by having, 16,000 conversations with each of our different students down there. So we need some way of embedding this, hopefully, so that many students can self-serve. So what we did back in 2017, so there was actually quite a lot of work that went up to this in 2017. So in 2017, after a lot of different conversations, we managed to convince the university that we needed some online way of being able to support students throughout a qualification. So as I said, they get their 9 months when they've got a nice module page there, but the 3 months in between, they don't really have access to anything at the OU. Then they do their next 9 months. So this now provided us what I'm calling our Maths and Statistics study site with a home that these students could engage with right the way through their qualification. So what we were hoping with this is that it becomes a one-stop shop for students where they can access or at least have signposting to the support that they need at every single stage of that study experience down there. So we set this up in 2017, mainly as a pilot down there. What we tried to do was, as I say, have it following those 6 stages. We didn't quite manage that completely because being the OU, the banner at the top is now something that we can't change, so we have to try and retrofit in our journey into those drop-down menus across the top of that. But that's not, complete disaster down there. But anyway, that's kind of how it is. So every single discipline now has one of these study sites that follows a similar sort of pattern, but I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Now, because we'd already set up this partnership working, it meant that we could have input from these different areas into what sorts of things should really go onto this website. I don't want to talk about this website in too much detail, but anybody that's interested, I'm happy to give you more details afterwards. So there's kind of 2 or 3 areas that I want to pick up on this. So in that drop-down Discover tab, we basically have information there for students at that pre-arrival and arrival orientation stage down there. So there's various bits and bobs for them to look at. The bit that I want to kind of talk about is that there we have a diagnostic quiz for students as they come into maths and stats in the first place. So we have two levels of entry into our qualifications, depending how much previous mathematics and statistics knowledge students have. So we have what's called a Are You Ready For quiz for the higher module, which is MST 124. Those results that the students do drop into something called Greybook down there. And the good thing about that is that we can, as students register, we can see not only what their outcome of that quiz is, but also the students that haven't done the quiz. So we can have some wraparound support at that stage by getting somebody to contact any student that hasn't actually engaged with that quiz. If students have done particularly badly, again, we can have some sort of contact early on to explore whether these are the right sort of qualification starting point for that particular student. So essentially, it was potentially one of the things that increased our retention, maybe possibly more than anything else that we've ever done to tweak things around there. And I don't think it's necessarily about the result that these students got, but it's about ensuring that they've got that engagement with us as a university before they actually start. That was the bit that was the real turning point in there. And as I say, it's kind of linking that back in with the support and making sure that they've got contact in there as well. Skills section I don't really want to talk about, but basically that's a sort of introduction to study type of stage, and we've got various bits of resources to help students on there. So what I want to focus on, partly because of the evaluation that I'm going to show you, is the plan section. So this is really to do with that reorientation and reinduction. So this is really for the students that are partway through that qualification. They've done a module and they want to know what module should they study next. So that's not just a problem at the OU, that's a problem at virtually every university that I've worked at anywhere. How do we really get that information to students so they understand what's in the modules that are coming up and can take some sensible sort of choices, partly so that whatever they choose at level 2 doesn't sort of kind of cut down options that they suddenly might want to do at level 3. So what we do is we publish both pass rates and completion rates for every single module that we run. We've about the last 3 to 5 years we do that. We also give them all of the student feedback, so the module evaluation gets published upon there as well. There's a bit about plan new modules, but importantly, what I'm going to show you is we also have sub-pages for every single one of our modules. So we have what we call a Discover Your Module sub-page. So this gives them more information than just a paragraph about what that module is about. So if you concentrate on the left-hand side rather than the right-hand side of this slide. So this is what a Discover Your Module page looks like for a level 2 module. So this is actually a module that I'm sort of in charge of looking after. So each of these pages looks similar to this. Every single one of them, again, has a Are You Ready For diagnostic quiz. It forms a slightly different purpose now to the quiz that I told you about, which is to do with making sure students start in the right level. What these quizzes look at is making sure that students remember enough about things that are in those previous modules to be in a good position to start this module. So as they go through this Are You Ready For quiz, if they get questions wrong, it actually points them to resources where they can revise and refresh that particular aspect before they start on this course. So remember what I said, students tend to have the months between kind of June and September where they could engage with these pages and really get themselves in a state where they're ready to start come September, hit the ground running, if you like, rather than trying to always play catch up with this. They've got what I might call a bells and whistles syllabus. It's slightly more than a syllabus down there. So hopefully this kind of explains in student focused language what the module is really about and how it links into other modules down there. It has an outline study calendar, mainly so if students are thinking of taking multiple modules, they can see how that fits together and how that might affect with anything else going on in their life as well that they might need to adjust for. It also, importantly, has early bits of that module that the students can access. So essentially it has roughly between about the first 4 to 6 weeks maybe of the module material down there, bearing in mind that these are 9 months long, so that's not quite as big a chunk as you're actually thinking. So it means that students that think that they may have a difficult time come January can kind of get a head start on this and make an early start with it. Okay, the right hand side I won't necessarily talk about. And the final part of that kind of journey in there is the sort of careers next stages. And as I say, we kind of link in with careers in various other places, RSS being one of them as well down there. So that's an awful lot of resources. Absolutely fine. But what we want is we want to make sure that students are engaged with this and are engaged with each other and ourselves about all of this. So alongside this, we run again another online forum there, but this forum has the focus of it being about module choice. So students being students, of course, talk about a whole variety of other things on there. Sometimes that's useful in terms of feedback to us. Sometimes it's not so useful. So you do need somebody, i.e. me, moderating this sort of forum to make sure that some of these conversations keep on track as well with that. But it is a place that it does mean that students at level 3 can give advice to students at level 4. There's an awful lot of sort of peer support that goes on in this forum. One of the best things about it is that there's an awful lot of our tutors that engage with this as well. So they start to build up a knowledge of what might be in other modules too. There's staff like me involved in this. Also, those support staff that I've talked about, remember those people that are giving this advice to students but are not mathematicians in any way, they are also on this forum as well. So it has the dual purpose of them being able to pick up kind of pastoral type of questions as well as increasing their own knowledge about our modules as well down there. Okay, so that's the kind of engagement part with this. So as I say, 2019 we are now. I thought that this has been running for a couple of years. It would be really good to evaluate how students and how staff are using this. It's embedded in Moodle, so I thought this would be a relatively easy task. I could just pull out lots of data. I'm a statistician. It would be absolutely fine. How wrong one can be when we come to this sort of thing. So one of the things that makes it difficult is because of the routing in there. Our systems only actually records hits from people doing our qualifications. So whilst I've got, let's say, 16,000 students doing maths and stats modules, only half of those students are doing a maths and statistics qualification. The other half of them are studying our modules as part of something like economics, computing, science. Many people take individual modules as part of CPD and so on. So any kind of click data that I've got is purely and simply from our maths and statistics students. Fantastic. Anyway, so that does give us at least some information down there. So I apologise for this because when I first started to put together these graphs and there was only 2 years of data, the graphs were sort of kind of self-explanatory, whereas now they're just a kind of mess of lines down there. But essentially what you have on the left-hand side are the number of students that visit the site every month. So that's a kind of summary of this sort of thing. So the solid line at the bottom is when we started in 2017. There's been a kind of increase every year up until about 2020, when it's sort of tailed off to a certain extent. This was slightly depressing for me because out of about 8,000 students, it meant that certainly in the former years that only potentially less than half of those students were actually using this site and accessing it. So that's the kind of depressing picture down there. The right-hand side is sort of less depressing. They're the number of hits on a monthly basis that happen. So whilst you might think there's only potentially, about 3,000 students maybe hitting that site, of those students, many of them return on a multiple basis to this site. So we kind of think that maybe it's doing its job and it is becoming that sort of one-stop shop that students access on a multiple range of times down there. Okay, so because I can't get data on everybody, and also I wanted slightly more qualitative data as well, there was a couple of surveys that went out. So this one, it went out to students in 2020, basically asking them things like, do they even know the site exists and how they've used it? There's a range of different qualifications it went out to. Of course, there's a very small number of students that return this, but even so, we got relatively useful information from this. Most of the useful information is that the students that didn't use the site just didn't realise that the site was there. So this is fine. This means that there was work to do around communications to students. So we ended up building a kind of communication strategy going out to students to alert them to this at various points during their study. Also things like we created a Maths and Stats newsletter, which had lots of nice kind of fun articles in there, but also highlighted a particular area of the study site. Because, as I say, this is in Moodle, the data, I can see what happens on a daily basis. So every time there's a prod to students, there's a kind of spike in that data set, but the residual number that then carry on using it increases very slightly. So every time you prod students, you get a slight payback on this. I don't want to talk about that. I don't really want to talk about that either, but basically this says that the main way that students use the site are those discover your module pages and helping them to really get a grip on deciding what module to study next. So that's good. That's what it was there for. So most of their qualitative feedback was the resources are really good, and but actually it's quite difficult to find things. So we did a bit of work around having a kind of pop-up on those sites that gives people a slight tour of where things are on there. I'm really not sure we've kind of cracked that nut yet, and I think there's more work to do on that. So if you're thinking about something like this, I think it's a good idea to talk to web designers a bit more than what we did and really kind of think about the architecture of how to find things on there. What they really liked, as I say, was early access to module material and the information that that gave them down there. So feedbacks from this, think about how students go around the site and think about communicating to students how they actually find it in the first place. Remember, this site was a kind of dual purpose type of thing. Part of it was to help all of those people in our support teams actually give this advice to students as well. So we also evaluated staff down there. So in terms of staff groups, we sent this out to our tutors because ideally we want them to engage with this as well. The two groups of staff in the student support team, so those ones linked to the school, and the larger group of staff that sit in that student recruitment and finance area, you know, the kind of triaging people at the end of the phone that are linked at that faculty level down there. It's kind of quite interesting. There's a sort of 50-50 split in the tutors about whether they actually realised that whether they'd used the site before or not. The SST staff, so the support staff linked into the school, the vast majority of them use the site. Thank goodness for that, because that's what it was there for in the first place. More depressingly, about 2/3 of the staff that are that first port of call didn't use the site or even realise it was there. So I'll skip over some of this lot in the interest of time. But essentially, the people that use it both for their own information and also in terms of the SST staff to aid with their conversations with students as well. Most of the staff that didn't use it across those two categories of tutors and the first port of call staff just didn't realise it was actually there. So again, there's something there around a communication strategy that we needed to put in place with that. So this is some qualitative feedback from those different groups of staff. This is from our tutors. How I was unaware of this site, I do not know. Now I've discovered it, I'm delighted to say not only shall I refer to it now and again, but I'll make a point of mentioning it to my students at the beginning of each new module session. So this is kind of win-win, because if we can get students engaged with this, they will then pass that information on to their students as well. So the communication strategy to tutors is not about, do you know this site is there, but about, can you pass this information on to your students? So it means that they're kind of involved in this process as well down there. For the staff, those ones, the end of the call centre down there, most of them, as I say, had no idea that this actually existed in the first place. So feedback from them is there's good context, but it's not advertised directly to us. And if it hadn't been for this survey, I wouldn't have known that this existed. So again, we did a piece of work here around how we could raise awareness of this with this group of staff. So there's various bits now that are incorporated into what they use as their sort of knowledge management system, which is basically where they pull all of their information from that they give out to students. That sounds like something quite small, but actually you wouldn't believe, or you possibly would believe, the amount of internal politics that it takes to get a page like that up and running. So that was a kind of bigger win than you might imagine with that. The sort of pleasing one is, of course, the staff that are linked into the school down there. They use this on a regular basis. So there were loads of comments like this back from them saying it's so valuable for us to have a resource like this to refer to and to steer students towards. Student self-service is a big help, and more information they have assists their own decision process. That in turn can cut down on any confusion and unnecessary information exchanges. And this is kind of quite important for us because it means that the students don't have multiple people that they're necessarily talking to down there. Okay, so this is my last slide, Simon. So in terms of impact down there, I've talked about various things that I think, you know, if you're thinking about something like this, things to think about, mainly around communication, mainly around making sure that you really do work in partnership. The more you can get all of the staff engaged in something like this, the better it's actually going to be down there. So they're my big take-home messages. The other thing is, never expect a quick win with this. So I've been doing this since 2014, and I'm still sort of kind of trying to chip away at the edges round about that. So being there for the long haul with this sort of thing. But I think the more that we can raise awareness within our own community and start to share ideas about how we really do support students outside of our own individual modules, the better we're going to come to as a community with an understanding of what works and what doesn't. And I'll stop there, Simon, and then there's a bit of time for anything that might have occurred. I'll stop sharing as well.
Well, thank you very much for that, Rachel. So I can't see that. Oh, there it is. I know somewhere on Teams that you can applaud people. Just slightly more difficult to find than on Zoom. There you go. So thank you. Just while people are getting their act together on questions, a couple of things. One that came up during your session is you had a screen up where you showed some of the Discover Your Module page.
Yep.
And I think it was a bit too small for people to read any of the detail. Are we going to be able to have access to the slides? So
yeah, you can have access to the slides for that.
Okay, we'll try and sort that out through the RSS. So if you want to actually look at the detail there, we'll post them on the teaching stats page on the RSS. Right, in that case, yeah, perhaps a couple of comments for me just while people think about questions. I can see there's one there already. I did get slightly confused when you started talking about M&S at one point, I must admit. But anyway.
Yeah, they're not just any
thing,
students, they're M&S students.
the other thing to say is I actually, given your plots about the number of hits on sites, we've been doing similar things for us, and your numbers look pretty good, I have to say. So don't get too despondent. Right, okay, on to questions. So I think we've got Jamie Sargent's got the first question. Jamie, do you want to say something, or shall I? I think Rachel probably see your question in the chat now, but
I can see that. So this is about what proportion of students are taking a pick and mix approach. It depends what you mean by a pick and mix approach. So there's about half of our students that are on some sort of qualification within maths and stats. Of the other half, about half of those students are on some other qualification. So be that economics or whatever it happens to be. So that leaves about a quarter of the students in there that are taking a pick and mix approach. Now, that pick and mix approach, Jamie, actually includes what we call our open degree, where essentially students can do any module that they like, providing it's at the right level down there. And it's very difficult for us because we are open to actually insist on prerequisites. So that's one of the reasons why something like this is quite important, because if you've got somebody coming in saying, actually, I'm going to do this third level module, which has got generalized linear models in there, but I've never actually met anything to do with hypothesis testing, that's a little bit of an issue. Even worse if they're doing mathematical statistics, but I've never met any sort of calculus. That's also a bit of an issue.
Thank you. Jamie looks happy with that, I think. So I think Andrew Dorby's got the next question about using diagnostic quizzes.
Diagnostic quizzes.
Yeah.
Do you have students disputing their result? Yeah. I think that the retention issue is significant. But okay, so the interesting thing about the diagnostic quiz is because so this goes back to a project sort of that predates this site really, where I was quite keen on looking at the results from this diagnostic quiz and tracking it through in terms of pass rates for this. So what's quite interesting about the diagnostic quiz is it doesn't matter what the result is that the student has. The overriding important bit is whether the student has engaged with the quiz. And as I say, that is because not necessarily anything to do with their mathematical ability, but it's their engagement with the university and engagement with getting into that sort of mindset of being about to study. That's important. So it depends how you use the quiz, but what I would say is the students to follow up are not necessarily the students that have done badly, but the students that haven't engaged with it. So that would be the biggest kind of take-home message, I think, from that. Yeah, publication of pass rates. Sorry, I'm just picking up questions now, Simon. Publication of pass rates and progress rates on modules can be misleading. Absolutely, yes. But what it does is it provides a mechanism for students to talk to each other. So students like nothing better, do they, in maths and statistics, and a few sort of bizarre results to be able to start to have a discussion about, is this module really as bad as it says, and that sort of thing. And you can kind of guide that discussion with all sorts of reasons behind that. So for me, it's more about being open with the students about what those results are, and then you know, letting them start those discussions and guiding it around that. So we have an MSc data science at Kingston where students start any time in the year and take 4+1 modules in any order. I imagine this would be really helpful for them in bridging gaps between modules, absolutely. And if you've got them taking it in any order as well, then it's even it's even more important, because actually you can make them see the connections between that other, rather than them going like this and then flitting around with that. So yeah, I would absolutely agree with you, Rupert, on that. Sorry, Robert, on that. That, you know, anything that you can do, in my experience, to help students can only help. Best of luck with that.
I think you missed one out there, Rachel.
I missed one out, sorry.
From Eleanor, just above Roberts.
Okay, do you have any experience of offering detailed individual pastoral support online? Yes. So yes, because you know, all of our students are at a distance, so this is either online or it's picking up the telephone or wherever it happens to be. So this ranges from support that can be I need an extension on this bit of coursework to actually I am in dire personal circumstances, do we need to send the police round? So yes, the full range, but possibly not something to answer in 2 minutes. But do feel free to contact me about that.
Just while we're talking about dealing with students, Rachel, one of the things you talked about was students didn't know about the Discover Your Module website, and so you had to communicate with them. One of the issues we have is actually communicating with our students, rather bizarrely, because they tend not to read emails. Do you have a better way of actually communicating with them?
Yeah, so okay, so students tend to read. So because we have these tutors that support students, students will tend to read emails that come from those tutors more than they'll read emails that come from the university out there. So if you can possibly embed your information in a sort of personal contact with the students, you actually get far more of them picking that up than if it's just a blanket, you know, engage with this, because they just don't bother reading that at all. So you need to find clever ways, which is part of the reason why we set up the sort of newsletter as well, and just embedded some of this within the newsletter too. So it gave them a different way. I think the main thing is just do it in a number of different ways. So if this is something that you think is important, pick it up in a number of different ways, but with different angles, and eventually some of this seeps in and then they start to talk to each other about it. But if there's any way of doing it more personally, it's better.
I can see there's a couple of comments on the chat about this. I'll leave you to read them yourselves. But we've also got a couple more questions have come in as well. Firstly, from Christopher Brignall about advisors.
Yeah. So they do have fewer queries as a result of this. So they have fewer queries, and also they feel far more equipped to give better advice. So it's a kind of two-pronged thing on that. Absolutely. And anything that you can do to cut down on routine information means that those, you know, they're a fairly, I make them sound like this is an enormous team. It's not at all. Those advisors giving advice down there, I think there's about 6-7 people in this team. So if you think about the number of students we've got, that's not an awful lot of resource. So anything you can do to cut down on routine advice means that they can spend their time dealing with more complex queries and with the students that actually need that phone call rather than anything else down there. Jamie, it's hard to get any university to invest in anything. Tea and cake is my answer, with as many people as possible.
So I think I knew the first part of your answer already, Rachel. But it seems such a no-brainer. But I just wondered, you know, yeah, it's a struggle to get anything funded. So just wondering how you managed to twist arms, even if it appears so obvious it was going to be beneficial. How did you do it?
Is this still being recorded? So a lot of this is around figuring out what the university's priorities are at any one moment, and what is the latest buzzword and what are the latest strategies in there, and then trying to convince these people that actually your bit would help with that, delivering on that particular bit of the strategy across multiple different people down there. And it's a bit like I said about, you know, if you can feed it in from multiple different angles to students, if you can feed this into multiple different PVCs, deans, all the rest of it down there, eventually it becomes something that's talked about and is sort of then fed down into unit plans. But that's why I say you need to be in it for the long haul. So 3 years, I would say, from actually thinking we need something in place to actually getting that, and that we've got isn't really what we wanted, but it was something that we could run with. So it's also about compromise as well, thinking, when is enough enough? When can I take that and do something that's okay with it? Okay, it's probably worth picking up on that last point from Chris down there. So yes, there are links between the different study sites down there, and we link information across. So if somebody is studying maths and physics, yeah, there's absolutely a link between the maths and physics down there, and we try and make sure that the students are in the right community at the right time, but actually have the information cross-cutting down there. I make it sound like that works.
So unless anyone's got any other questions, but I've got one slightly off topic, which just refers to something you talked about near the beginning. You talked about how you check that students are engaged in online or synchronous activities. And that sort of intrigued me, because I think one of the things we've all found from lockdown, which presumably you've been dealing with for years, is that students may log on, but that's it. And how do we know they're actually engaged with the activities? And you would mentioned in passing that you had a way of doing that, so that's sort of intrigued me.
Okay, so do you mean with the asynchronous or synchronous?
No,
synchronous. With synchronous, so in terms of tutorials, that type of thing down there. So what do we use at the moment? We use Adobe Connect at the moment for doing tutorials. We've used a whole range of different things like Blackboard, but at the moment we use Adobe Connect. So there's an awful lot of things like polling in there. Tend to find that rather than asking people to type in the chat, if you set those up as open polling comments, they're far more likely to do that, because but they can't see what other students have written, so they're not necessarily thinking, oh, Darren will always answer that question type of thing in there. So there's all that sort of thing. But the main thing is making sure that you get through less material than you might have done before, and interspersing that all the time with something that you get the students to do. And mainly, I would say what I say to tutors in terms of staff development is, don't be afraid of the silence. So when you tell them, do this activity, do not jump in there. Tell them you've got 2 minutes and give them those 2 minutes to do that. So it's very easy to fill the silence.
Oh yes, one more question's just come in. Yeah.
Yeah, so I, the tutorials tend to be reasonably, they're more the size of what you might think of as example classes than them being huge online lectures there, because the OU is your original flipped classroom, really, isn't it, where we give them all the material and then get them to engage in these sessions. Yeah, the silence is really hard not to jump in on, and I would say that of course I've worked for the OU, then gone back into face-to-face, and then gone back to the OU, and I would say that actually that is the one thing that helps face-to-face teaching as well. I have trained myself over many years not to jump into that silence, and that is true in your face-to-face teaching as well.
Excellent. Is there any last question anyone had for Rachel? No, in that case, thank you very much. That was fascinating.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
And something that I guess, coming from a slightly different angle, it gives us for those of us not working at the OU, gives us a new perspective. That's great. So thank you very much. Details of the next session will be on the Teaching Stats site. The other thing I was just going to mention is we do have in February, but Rachel mentioned Talmo, the Teaching and Learning Mathematics Online. The Teaching Stats section will be running a Talmo session probably in February on using R. That's the programming language R. So if you're interested in that, keep an eye on Talmo for more details. Otherwise, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the week.